There exists a chasm in the world of trading that has nothing to do with capital, education, or access to information. It is not a matter of which indicators you use, which markets you trade, or how many hours you spend staring at charts. The division between those who consistently extract wealth from the markets and those who remain perpetually trapped in cycles of hope and disappointment runs far deeper than any technical consideration. It is a division of belief, and more specifically, it is a division in how traders conceptualize the very nature of what they are doing when they place a trade. The top 1% of traders operate from a belief system so fundamentally different from the remaining 99% that it reshapes every decision, every reaction, and every outcome. This belief is deceptively simple to state, but profoundly difficult to internalize. And it is this: the market owes you absolutely nothing, and your edge exists only in how you respond to that fundamental truth. Consider for a moment the psychological posture of the struggling trader. Beneath every impulsive entry, every violated stop-loss, every account blown to zero, there exists an unexamined assumption about the relationship between effort and reward. The struggling trader believes, often unconsciously, that the market is a system that should respond proportionally to their preparation, their analysis, their discipline, and their need. They have studied the charts, they have done their homework, they have waited for their setup, and so when they enter that position, there is an implicit expectation of reciprocation. They have fulfilled their end of an imagined bargain, and now the market should fulfill its end. This is not greed in the conventional sense. It is something more subtle and more insidious. It is the belief that reality is obligated to conform to our understanding of fairness, that correct analysis deserves correct outcomes, that hard work must be rewarded. When the trade moves against them, their response is not simply disappointment, but a form of existential betrayal. The market has violated the terms of a contract that never existed. This belief system creates a cascade of destructive behaviors that appear on the surface to be issues of discipline or risk management, but are in fact symptomatic of a much deeper philosophical error. The trader who moves their stop-loss because the trade should work is not simply breaking a rule. They are attempting to impose their will on a system that has no awareness of their existence. They are negotiating with an entity that cannot negotiate. They are pleading their case to a judge that cannot hear. Every rationalization, every justification for why this time is different, every moment of frozen inaction as losses mount, stems from the same root delusion: the belief that the market is something that can be reasoned with, that owes them consideration, that operates according to principles of fairness or justice. The emotional volatility that destroys so many trading careers is not a personality flaw, but the natural consequence of repeatedly having one's deepest assumptions about how reality should work contradicted by how reality actually works. Now consider the psychological landscape inhabited by the elite trader. Their relationship to the market is not one of expectation, but of perpetual negotiation with uncertainty. They have severed the invisible threads that connect effort to entitlement. When they analyze a chart, when they identify a pattern, when they calculate risk and potential reward, they do so with the full understanding that none of this analysis creates any obligation whatsoever for the market to behave in accordance with their conclusions. Their edge is not in their ability to predict, but in their capacity to participate without the psychological burden of needing to be right. This is not fatalism, nor is it a lack of confidence. It is a recognition of the actual nature of probabilistic systems. The elite trader understands that markets are complex adaptive systems composed of millions of individual decisions, each made under conditions of incomplete information and emotional stress, creating emergent patterns that are sometimes predictable and often not. Their framework is not built on the fantasy of control, but on the reality of influence. They cannot control what the market does next, but they can control their position sizing, their entry and exit rules, their emotional state, and their response to information. This shift in belief creates an entirely different emotional relationship to trading outcomes. When an elite trader takes a loss, and they take many, the experience is not one of betrayal or confusion, but of simple data collection. The market has provided information. That information is that the particular configuration of factors they identified as potentially profitable did not, in this instance, produce the expected result. This is neither good nor bad in any moral sense. It simply is. The loss does not challenge their competence or their understanding, because their competence and understanding were never predicated on being right about any single trade. Their edge exists in the aggregate, in the statistical distribution of outcomes across hundreds or thousands of trades, and no single outcome can threaten that edge. This creates a feedback loop of sustainable performance. Because they do not need any particular trade to work, they can exit positions cleanly when their thesis is invalidated. Because they do not interpret losses as personal failures, they do not experience the shame that prevents honest analysis. Because they view the market as inherently indifferent, they waste no energy on frustration or anger when their expectations are not met. The struggling trader is engaged in a fundamentally different activity. Though they use the same terminology and the same tools, they are attempting to be proven right. The elite trader is attempting to extract money from probabilistic inefficiencies. These are not the same goal. The need to be right is an ego-driven need, and the ego demands certainty in a domain that offers none. Every trade becomes a referendum on the trader's intelligence, skill, and worth. The market's movements are interpreted not as the complex output of a chaotic system, but as verdicts on the trader's judgment. This makes trading intensely personal in a way that is ultimately unsustainable. The emotional energy required to maintain this relationship to the market is enormous. Each day becomes a test that must be passed, and the inevitable failures accumulate not just as financial losses, but as psychological wounds. Over time, this creates either a defensive rigidity, where the trader cannot adapt because adaptation would require admitting previous approaches were flawed, or a chaotic inconsistency, where the trader abandons their methodology at the first sign of adversity in a desperate search for an approach that will finally deliver the certainty they crave. What makes this belief so difficult to uproot is that it is reinforced by nearly everything in our psychological evolution and cultural conditioning. Human beings are pattern-seeking creatures whose survival depended on the ability to identify cause and effect relationships. We are wired to believe that actions have predictable consequences, that preparation leads to success, that understanding creates control. These beliefs served us well in environments where the systems we interacted with were relatively simple and stable. But financial markets are neither simple nor stable. They are reflexive systems where the very act of predicting an outcome changes the probability of that outcome occurring. They are systems where information is instantly disseminated and incorporated into prices, where every edge is temporary and degrades through its own success, where the collective psychology of millions creates dynamics that no individual can comprehend in their totality. To trade successfully in such an environment requires embracing a way of thinking that contradicts our deepest instincts about how the world works. The transformation from struggling trader to elite trader is not therefore a matter of acquiring new information or mastering new techniques. It is a philosophical transformation, a restructuring of one's foundational assumptions about agency and control. It requires developing comfort with a level of uncertainty that most people find intolerable. It requires accepting that you can do everything right and still lose, that you can do everything wrong and still win, and that neither outcome tells you anything definitive about the quality of your process. This is not a call for passivity or resignation. Elite traders are intensely active and engaged, constantly refining their methods, constantly seeking new edges, constantly working to improve their execution. But their activity emerges from a place of curiosity rather than need, from a desire to optimize rather than to prove, from an acceptance of market reality rather than a fight against it. The practical implications of this belief shift are profound and touch every aspect of trading. Position sizing becomes rational rather than emotional. When you do not need any particular trade to work, you can size positions according to their actual risk profile, rather than according to how confident you feel or how badly you need to recover previous losses. Entry and exit discipline becomes natural rather than forced. When you accept that the market might do anything regardless of your analysis, you can honor your stop losses without internal conflict, because they represent not failure, but simply the point at which your thesis has been invalidated. Psychological recovery from losses becomes nearly instantaneous. When a loss is not a personal indictment but simply the cost of doing business in a probabilistic domain, there is nothing to recover from emotionally. You close the position, you record the data, you move to the next opportunity. Perhaps most importantly, this belief system allows for the development of genuine adaptability. The struggling trader becomes attached to their predictions and therefore cannot see when market conditions have changed in ways that invalidate their approach. They are fighting to be right about a call they made, rather than responding to what is actually happening. The elite trader has no such attachment. Their loyalty is to the process of extracting money from the market, not to any particular view of what the market should do. This allows them to change their mind without hesitation, to reverse positions when the evidence warrants, to sit in cash when no compelling opportunities exist. They are trading the market that exists, not the market they analyzed yesterday, or the market they wish existed. The journey to internalizing this belief is not quick, and it is not comfortable. It requires confronting the deep human need for control and security. It requires sitting with the anxiety that comes from accepting that you might lose money, even when you have done everything correctly. It requires developing a relationship with uncertainty that our entire psychological makeup resists. But the traders who make this journey discover something remarkable. They discover that true confidence comes not from the belief that you can predict the future, but from the knowledge that you can handle whatever the future brings. They discover that freedom exists not in control, but in the release of the need for control. They discover that their edge was never in their ability to bend the market to their will, but in their ability to participate in the market, without the psychological distortions created by expectation and entitlement. This is the single belief that separates the top 1%. Not that they are smarter or more disciplined or more determined, but that they have fundamentally reconceptualized what trading is and what relationship they have to the entity they are trading. They have accepted the market's indifference and built their entire approach on that foundation of acceptance rather than fighting against it in pursuit of a certainty that does not exist.